All right. So what is my take on the matter at hand, the abuse allegation? Well, it's pretty clear to me that there's a lot of evidence supporting a claim of bidirectional abuse: verbal, emotional, physical. Most of Amber Heard's allegations were likely exaggerations, but I could see some, maybe 2 to 5 of the incidents being legit, where he pushed her or punched her or got on top of her or something. My guess is that those incidents were brief, and either he was extremely intoxicated and it was after yelling at each other a lot, or it was defensive or in the midst of both people triggering each other and just going after each other. That doesn't make it okay, but it does contextualize it. There wasn't strong evidence that he is the classic abuser that would just come home and say, you were looking at that guy, and then just start punching her, right? Which is something that unfortunately a lot of people go through. So, and she was trying to paint him in that light. The sexual abuse, it's hard to say if that happened or not. It could have happened. It's hard to say. I am very uncomfortable with listening to anyone, regardless of gender, tell an audience that they were assaulted in this way. And I'm very uncomfortable with not believing them or even questioning. That is just not what I am used to, because I'm not in that role. And every time someone has told me these stories personally and professionally, I've had no reason to disbelieve them. Now, I have worked on some cases where there were false allegations. In fact, one time I was treating a family, and the younger brother accused the older brother of assaulting him. And I don't remember the circumstances, but I think what happened was there was some kind of alert that the younger brother might have been assaulted, like a school report or something. The police investigated and isolated the younger brother, and he was like 7 years old or something. And through the questioning, it came out that the older brother had perpetrated this abuse on the younger brother. And then the police went straight to the older brother, and all this happened in a very short amount of time, like a half an hour or something. They went after the older brother, and they isolate him, and they start badgering him. And the police officers know that the older kid, the teenager, was in therapy with me, as was everyone in the family. And the police officers, in all of their wisdom and ethics, decide to make up a lie to interrogate their subject and say that I told the cops that the teenager, told me that he had already abused the younger brother. So just imagine that. You're a teenager, you're already a little hesitant to go to therapy, and cops come into your room and start grilling you about something that he never did, by the way. And it seemed like the cops had elicited some kind of false memory from the younger kid. It's always hard to tell in these situations, but and this was many years ago, but I remember concluding a long time later that it just never happened, and it was this terrible mistake that everyone somehow believed in one day. It was a crisis that happened in one day, and then like the next day it all corrected itself and it was over. Anyway, so they tell the kid this, and guess what? The kid hated me. So I never was able to treat the kid again because he refused to talk to me after that. And I tried to tell him, the cops lied to you. And they're like, really? The cops, police officers don't lie? So I did work with a case where there was a false allegation, but I think it was elicited by someone. I don't know if it was the police officers, but it was someone. And I've told this story a number of times in the podcast, but I had another incident with the same police officer on another case that was I'm just going to call it immoral and unethical. This one police officer, in an effort to get at a confession, he would say anything. And this is when I learned that police officers can lie, that they can just make up anything. There are some things they can't make up, but they can make up a lot of things. And I thought it just destroyed my vision of what police officers like. Of course, not all police officers, but it was a wake-up call around that reality. And so I thought at the time in my 20s, I'm like, well, this is wrong. And I went to him and I was just like, you got to stop that. You're ruining all of my relationship. I'm trying to help these people. And you're just like, you could have interrogated or questioned the kid without ruining my chance at help. And also the teenager's never going to talk to another therapist again. Is that really what you want on your hands? Do you want that blood on your hands? The teenager who was already going through a lot of trouble, was falsely accused, and now is never going to talk to a therapist the rest of her life. Is that really what you wanted from this? And he's just like, essentially screw off. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go above his head. So I called his superior, and talked to him for a while. And the guy was nice and listened, but in the end said, well, there's nothing I can do because police officers can say whatever they want to during an interrogation, during an investigation. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess we're just going to be victims of random police officers with a power trip and with no morals about the bigger picture. Okay, I guess that's our fate. We're just completely powerless, and that is still, to my knowledge, the case. Maybe someone could tell me otherwise, but that happened a number of times later as well. So, no, not all police officers. Most are great, but some are not. And when you have a system that supports everyone and their unbridled power, the a-holes are going to get away with that stuff because there's no checks and balances in place. So, off topic. So, did the essay happen to her? Really hard to say. Could have happened. Is it another example of her exaggerating? There's some evidence that might be true because she didn't make those claims earlier. She announced them much later after the breakup. Having said that, most people who go through experiences like that, particularly in a marriage, will not disclose it to anyone. They won't tell their friends. And then years later, there's many cases, and some, Harvey Weinstein, other kinds of people, those victims, many of them never said anything because they knew it would be a vast net negative if they came forward, even to a friend. It's just easier to just try to forget it, right? Which is hard to do when you're traumatized. But now the finger. So in the beginning, it seemed very likely that Amber Heard did in fact throw the bottle that caused his finger to be excised, the tip of it. And then we hear that she put a cigarette, at least his account was she put a cigarette on his face. And I thought, oh my goodness, and hearing the audio, and it was just very convincing. Could have happened exactly that way. If I was to put a percentage on it, I'd put like a 55% chance, a 60% chance that that's what actually happened or something close to that. Now, did Amber Heard mean to cause the tip of his finger to be blown off? I don't think so. So even if that is true, I would imagine she was trying to just hurt him, but not that bad, be my guess, because we didn't have a lot of evidence that she would try to really harm him to that degree, right? Maybe, we don't know, but so I think there's a 60% chance that that's the way it happened. But the more I heard, not Amber Heard's testimony, honestly, because her testimony, it was so outlandish. It seemed so garbled, really. And it could be true, but the storyline just didn't make a lot of sense, and it didn't add up with other testimony and other audio recordings that she has said. And so her story didn't make a lot of sense. But when other people started chiming in, and maybe even providing some speculation, like the legal team for Amber Heard started to lay out like other possibilities, I started wondering, yeah, it's possible that they are both lying, that he actually did either accidentally or purposely, probably accidentally, given the way the wound is. Plus, and I said this earlier, I've never heard of a case, I'm sure it exists, where as a self-harm or non-suicidal self-injury, someone will cut or just smash the end of their finger off. People will punch walls sometimes. Obviously, the most common is to cut, but there are other things that people put cigarettes out. I've never heard of that, but you could imagine accidentally he's breaking things, which he was known to do. There's a video of him doing it, and he accidentally gets his finger caught in something and it just blasts off. So that could have happened. And then he's lying about that, and then she could be lying about all the other things that happened. So they could potentially both be lying in that situation. I don't know. I would give that like a 40% chance or 30% chance of being true, that he actually did do that to himself, either an accident or kind of on purpose. But then her story about what happened was in all likelihood an exaggeration, given the way she told the story, which is interesting to think about. It's like you don't have to pick one or the other. You can just be like, well, both of them seem like hard to believe. And that story of bottle, then another bottle, finger, and then she goes after him, blood is going everywhere. She goes after him with a cigarette butt on the face. It just seems out of the ordinary regarding the evidence. Could it have happened? Yes. But I've been saying that for me, it's like, wow, that's a level of cruelty that we haven't seen yet. Could it have happened? Yes. Could it be an exaggeration? Yeah. There's a fair amount of statements, not just once, but multiple statements from Johnny Depp himself stating that he, in fact, cut his own finger off. Now, people say, well, he's trying to protect Amber Heard at the beginning. But there's another audio recording. He says, in Australia, when I cut my finger off. Now, he might claim, well, it's just a figure of speech. Well, I don't know. Like, it starts to look a certain way, right? As I was saying earlier, Johnny Depp I believe had extreme jealousy and abusive behavior thereof. Maybe not physical, definitely verbal, definitely controlling, definitely slut-shaming of her and body shaming of her. I have a hard time believing that all those accounts are lies. And I also believe the accounts that when he would use substances to excess, that he would become belligerent, maybe not necessarily violent physically, but would become verbally violent. I believe that. I think there's strong evidence for that. There's a ton of evidence just from the audio recordings alone that she was controlling regarding not letting him separate and was berating him in some very severe ways. The verdict, do I believe it to be fair? I would say, yeah, overall, I think it's fair because we don't want people like Amber Heard to be able to make a simple claim about being an abuse victim and ruin other people's lives in a variety of ways when they in fact were abusive, perhaps just as much, if not more abusive. And so if I were to put like some kind of weird ranking of abuse going, because it to my eyes, it was bidirectional, and I don't see how you could possibly see it otherwise. Unless you really believe Amber Heard and it was always self-defense. But listening to those audio tapes, it just doesn't play that way. And I guess you could make the same claim about Johnny Depp. But to me, my opinion is they were equally abusive. And it's really hard for people to wrap their minds around that because we live in such this black and white thinking of, and particularly that women are always the victims. But if you kind of push yourself a little further, you can be like, well, men are sometimes victims. But if you push yourself even further, you could be like, well, both partners can be alternatingly abusive. Maybe Amber Heard was more abusive. Maybe it's like a 70-30 thing or a 60-40 thing. But I don't know, of course, because I wasn't there and I'll never know, but I'm guessing that if I were a fly on the wall and I was inside their minds in terms of how they felt about things, I would probably, I'm just going to take a guess, and if I were to put my money, when I say put my money, I'm really saying none of us, with roulette, if I put money on the number 23, none of us know if 23 is going to come up, right? It's just a guess. And so that's what I'm saying is if I were to put my money down on something, I would say bidirectional, intimate partner violence, verbal, emotional for sure, physical, yes, and probably more her physical than him, and probably more her controlling than him. He was probably controlling regarding paranoid jealousy, but it seemed like her control was unrelenting. And he would apologize. And he would identify, I have a problem with jealousy. She almost never said, I have a problem with not letting you leave. Or at least to my memory, she wouldn't do that. So she seemed much more locked in around that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that he didn't do things to her and could have not done those things if he decided or got treatment around that. So that's what I am saying. And I also think that it's fair because, like I've been saying, we want to have that asterisk that this case provides us with a public service if we utilize it that way. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of misogynists and conservatives that will use this case as a way to fight back against Me Too, which they've been doing for decades, right? And fight back against feminism, which they've been doing for millennia. That will happen, and that's inevitable. They were already up to that before this case anyway. But overall, what we can do among us rational human beings is we can use this case to nuance our understanding of victims coming forward and of perpetration. Just the idea of bidirectional intimate partner violence. Almost everyone I talked to, including some clinicians, by the way, didn't even know that existed. And I'm like, wow, it's common. Anyone in domestic violence treatment knows that it's a fairly common thing. Now, there's two types of bidirectional. Sometimes it's a label for someone being defensively violent, but a lot of times it's because both people come from abuse backgrounds where they were taught those things and they come together and they both deal with their attachment issues and their arguments by intimidating or hitting or controlling. They both do that. And this is I think a pretty good example of that. He would be triggered around jealousy and paranoid jealousy, and he would would control and would almost gaslight her a little bit. She testified that, and I believe it, that she started to modify her own dress because she believed what he was saying. She didn't do it to please him. She became convinced of his narrative. And that seems quite possible given the testimony from multiple people, including people that knew Johnny Depp before he was with Amber Heard. So that's abusive, right? It's clear. And he might have even been violent or broke things in moments like that, particularly when he was highly intoxicated. She was also clearly abusive. That is undisputed. The audio tapes are there. I didn't punch you, I hit you, and then you're a baby, you're a pussy. It just, I mean, you've heard the audio. It's awful. So that alone was an abusive moment, and I think those moments happened very frequently. So we see both people. We can have that, and we need to get that into our minds. That can exist. Now, that doesn't mean that whenever someone comes in and both people have been violent and one person is saying, I was the victim, that you're just like, well, you're both violent, it's bidirectional. No, nuance. Complicated. It takes a while to assess these kinds of things, and we don't want to use bias to guide us. We want to be open to the data if you're in that kind of a role. Anyway, I was thinking like in a couple months, if a bunch of other stuff have come out, maybe an Amber Heard interview here and there, or some new piece of data, or one of the jurors does an interview or something, I'll do some other stuff. But I want to take a break for a couple months. So just personally, me and my wife want a break. It's been interesting. It's been fascinating to me and my wife, honestly. And it's often what we talk about at night. It's like, did you see this? Did you see, oh my God. And so it's been interesting for sure, but it's been super stressful for two main reasons. One is the bullying, which is just terrifying. It's just like me and my wife in my house. And a lot of you have been very nice to me. Me and my wife are just alone in my house. I don't have an electric fence or a security guard. Should I have that? Should I start getting lawyers who go after people for, being liable? People are being liable about me right now. They're saying stuff about me that's just not true. And they're all working together. And it's just like, just go away. Yeah. I want that to be over. The other thing is, it has been so time consuming on my life. It has been almost all that I've been doing for the past 2.5 months. Because these videos, my normal videos, they're 20 minutes long, and the editing process might take half an hour. The production side might be an hour, so that's for every 20 minutes, that's about 2 hours. These trial videos take probably 10 to 15 hours for every 1 hour that I post. So, and I was posting an hour a day, so on the weekend. So I was posting 7 hours a week. So just extrapolate that's so it's probably like 60 hours of work a week for those 7 hours of video. And no joke, like today, I woke up in the morning and I started to do content, and it's 4:00 right now, and I'll be working late into the night tonight. And so now I'm not looking for sympathy. It's my choice. And I'm doing it because I know it's temporary and I like it. And it's extremely interesting to me. And I always feel when I commit to something, I feel like I have to deliver to people that are interested. And so, it's not like digging a ditch or hard labor or something. I'm just sitting here in my office, So there's that. But I'm looking forward to taking a breather and having some free time. And just to put a fine point on it, I work 7 days a week, every day of the month. It's just constant. I've done some things, here and there. Father's Day, hung out with my family. My wife actually had an art show. I posted a picture on Instagram. She won first place in the art show. I'm very proud of her. Her work is really beautiful. You can check it out. So, that was a whole day of that. Me and my wife had an anniversary the other night, 2 nights ago, and celebrated that together, and we've done other things. But my point is, and I hung out with Bob. Anyway, I've done things. My journey with this, and this is the last thing I'll say, is I knew about the trial, but I was pretty busy with other things and didn't really know much about what's happening. Then I started getting all these emails. You got to react to Dr. Curry. You got to react to Dr. Curry. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll sit down. I'll watch the Dr. Curry segment. Maybe it'll be half an hour. I'll post that and move on with my life. Well, that was 5 hours of video, which again took 50 hours or 40 hours of editing and production time. And I posted that and I'm like, okay, I'm done. Then we had Dr. Hughes. And I'm like, crap. So I did Dr. Hughes. And that took another week or something. And then I'm like, okay, fine. I'm in it to win it. I'll start from the very beginning of the trial. And I started working my way through the trial, and that took forever as well. It was worth it. And then we had Dr. Spiegel, and then we had Dr. Shaw, and then we had Dr. Curry back on the stand, then we had Dr. Hughes back on the stand, then we had Johnny's Depp's testimony, and then we had Amber Heard's testimony. And it just sort of grew in my life. And I heard people talking about the trial, and they seemed to know all these micro things about like this recording and, May 21st, all that. I was like, wow, these people know a lot. I feel like I'm in that direction now. I feel like I've become one of those people that is a super nerd for the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp allegations and audio recordings and legal ups and downs. And so it's been interesting. It's been a crash course, 2.5 months, 3 months, where I basically came from knowing absolutely nothing. I didn't even really know who Amber Heard was, to tell you the truth. And then boom, I know so much now. Now I know some of you all know more than I do, but so that's been interesting. And then another aspect to this for me personally was there was a lot of press around, a lot of talk, a lot of social media stuff around the trial, particularly kind of in the beginning or in the middle zone. And when I started posting, new people started to discover me, hence the bullies, by the way, but most people aren't. So I started getting a lot more emails and DMs and stuff. And I don't know if you remember when I was on Nick Vile's podcast, that kind of thing. And there were a number of things like that. And so it wasn't just making of the videos, but it was also like, okay, well, that person wants me to come on their show and talk about this. I should probably do that because I want to educate the public about a lot of things and their audience, and this is a good chance for that. And so I should do that. So there were a lot of moments like that. That has died down. The attention is over. I think as soon as the verdict came in, people stopped caring about the trial for the most part. And so here we are now. And so that was also a whirlwind for me, was just all that. So, and that was fun and interesting, stressful, but worth it. And I'm looking forward to all that being over too. Just like I like to just be in my little office and hang out with my dogs and my wife and have a sandwich and just chill. I just want that for my life. The other journey, the last journey that I went on was professionally. It's not often that I get a chance to talk about intimate partner violence, particularly bidirectional. My dog is barking. I get to talk about substance abuse issues on the podcast. I don't get a chance to really go into Me Too and victims' rights and the history. In the verdict video I made, I talked about the history of misogyny and sexism that we've been perpetrators of in our society for many, many years. And there are these, key examples, Britney Spears, Monica Lewinsky, these people, Anita Hill, that came forward with legit things, and then everyone decided to, make fun of them and slut shame them in really horrific ways. And when we look back now, we're just like, ooh, like we were, why now a lot of people are like, I wasn't like that, but I guarantee you probably were. You just didn't know it or have a hard time remembering that. And so I had a chance to talk about all these different things in some real detailed ways. It also gave me a chance to reacquaint myself with forensic psychology. When I first started reacting to Dr. Curry, I remembered stuff, but I was rusty. It had been 10 years since I had really done that sort of work, or 8 years or something. And I was aware of the broad strokes, and as I was going through the testimony, I would comment, and then when things would come up, I would say, well, you know what, I should probably just bust out my old books and maybe look up some research. There's probably new research in the last 8 years regarding ATR and all that kind of stuff. So I looked it up and I was like, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. And some stuff I was learning brand new, and some stuff I was reacquainting myself with. I appreciate that. I'm a little embarrassed though, because I don't know if it's true, but I suspect my early videos in forensic psychology, I was saying some simplistic things. I'm just going to take a guess on that. But so there's that cringe that I have. But overall, that's my journey about that. It's been interesting. And I guess the very, very last journey I'll say is a journey with you all, is a lot of the emails and the comments and the super thanks and the support and the chiming in and the disagreeing and the, kindly pointing something out. People say, hey, you got this wrong. I'm like, oh, that's right. I missed some details. It's good for me to know that kind of stuff. And it felt like we were all kind of in this together, watching, like we were all around the water cooler talking about stuff. It's a shared cultural moment that I'm usually not a part of. When the whole O.J. Simpson trial happened in the 90s, like I don't think I had a television set in the mid 90s, and I definitely didn't have cable because I couldn't afford it. So I heard about people watching the trial, and I'm like, it's just not my life. And so it's pretty rare that I'm like participating or at least watching or staying up to date. It's rare that I'm staying up to date that much up to date with like day-to-day events like that. And it's certainly brand new for me to participate in an extremely minor way in the public discourse around this sort of thing. And I felt strangely situated to be able to comment on certain things because I don't know I'm sure they exist, and let me know if any do exist, but I don't know of any YouTubers or any content providers of any kind that knew about borderline and forensic psychology and addiction and intimate partner violence as I did. Those people exist in the world, but not content providers. Very few of us in my field actually are on the internet providing content. And so as I was watching the trial, I'm like, wow, like this is perfect for me. I treated perpetrators who were convicted of crimes regarding domestic violence and were court mandated to be in my treatment group, and I was there to make them not be a perpetrator anymore and change their personalities. I'm a specialist in borderline and histrionic. I've worked in drug treatment centers off and on over the years and have a lot of experience with that. And I'm trained as a forensic psychologist and did that work very briefly. Not a lot, but enough, I suppose, to reacquaint myself. So that was interesting to provide that voice to the internet. The last thing I'll say is that when I first started doing reaction videos 2 years ago to reality television, and people were saying, wow, this is really great, keep doing more. And I'm like, really? Okay. So I started doing more. One of the themes of feedback I would get from people is, you're so wholesome because you're not attacking these people. And I'm like, wholesome? I've never been called wholesome before. Is everyone else attacking the reality TV stars? Like, why is everyone attacking them? Like, maybe one or two of them out of 50 you could legitimately attack because their on and off screen behavior is deplorable, but most of them are just living their lives and fumbling around the way we all do. I don't understand why they would be getting attacked. And then I thought, well, surely there are other people like me out there. And then I found out there kind of wasn't. I'm like, why? Because I don't consider myself to be a unique human being. I'm just not prone to that kind of rhetoric or something. And so over time, I started realizing, there's some kind of cultural thing or even a lot of pent up anger that we will displace onto the cast members. So that was an interesting phenomenon to realize that, because I wasn't trying to be wholesome. I was just being myself and as a professional. But those two things over time for all therapists tend to kind of blend together usually. Like my professional clinical self and my personal self kind of start to become one. Then when I started watching this trial, a very similar thing would happen, as people would say, and I don't know how accurate this is, but I've heard from a number of people saying I'm the only source that they can find that isn't just blasting one side or the other. And I thought, am I running into that again, where which I believe I represent a large portion of people in my field. I don't think that I'm unique. I don't think I'm rare. I think a lot of clinicians who understand these kinds of things and treat these kinds of people would have a very similar vibe. They would say different things, of course, because they're different people. So yeah, I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but I think that we don't need everyone to be wholesome or unbiased or careful. I like to use the word careful, because if one of them is an awful human being, I'm not going to say they're not. I'm just going to be careful about making those kinds of statements or claims or something. But I think if it is rare, we need to change that. And I think part of that has to do with what we consume, right? Which I have much more knowledge of in the reality TV world, in that I think when people watch reality TV and they go online, they don't want nuanced opinions. They want someone screaming, regardless of which direction it is. They just want people to be going, so-and-so is a psychopath. It's just fun. But when you click on all that stuff, and I'm not going to accuse y'all, but when we click on that stuff, including myself, we're encouraging a middle schoolization of our society. Not to denigrate middle schoolers, but this black and white, I don't know, like extreme reactions or something, and normalizing all that. Because if my reaction is very foreign to people, we have a problem in our society, not because I'm unique. It's because content providers are probably pushed in directions and encouraged to go in those directions. Like as I'm watching the trial and I'm being bullied by one side, one of the things I was tempted to do, I did not do. Well, I did a little. I did like a 1% version of this. Was I don't want to get bullied, so I started, I started to wonder, should I just like land on one side so that the other side will just go away, or I'll reduce the bullying by half? Should I just say, yes, I agree, Amber Heard is a monster and case closed? There's a temptation to do that because you're getting this pressure. And not only the bullying, but also people that weren't bullying, they were nice, but they also just thought I was upsetting them because I wasn't landing on one side. There were nice people that were reacting that way too. And I think for a lot of this is just me taking a guess, for a lot of content providers, there's a lot of pressures to do that. And if you're already kind of in that direction anyway, then you just become sort of this creation of one side of the story as a content provider, and you just end up constantly in this bias rage, which of course we can see in the political spectrum, right? When you got the Fox News and the other outlets on the other side, and everyone is siloing, and it's safer there because your fans will come to you and the people who disagree won't even bother consuming your content, right? And I think that's a problem in a variety of ways, of course, that I don't need to tell you about. I'm sure you know that. So we can all do better by clicking on other things. Do you click like that? Click on nuance. Click away from extremists, depending on the topic, and contribute nuance. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself and take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.